My name is Mustapha Rufai. I am speaking and sharing my story around documents, demos, and mentors around open source tools and how it works generally from my own experience, waiting for fintechs and products from Africa. So today we are going to look at a couple of interesting concepts that allows us to learn about how to build open source tools environment where things are not necessarily stable. So I am going to describe to you a strategy that I call from the mud, Potokoto engineering. Welcome everyone to this session. In 2025, with the global open source, and we have so many metrics in which we use to define this kind of story. The ITU from United Nations body, they released a report last year called age gap. And in this gap, they talked about people who use the internet and the kind of cost and infrastructure that they have access to. And then we now look at the two different kind of dynamics, the consumers and the contributors. But we know that there are people who create open source tools, there are people who design that document, and there are people who consume these tools too. So our goal now, when we want to look at these tools and how it is being created and how it is being consumed, we want to consider how humans in different regions of the world are able to create an environment where, irrespective of the stances of that tool, they are still able to use that tool. So I started my career in Lagos, and I saw a very interesting gap. If you use an open source tool, generally anywhere, there is an expectation that the tool is unmetered as high-end hardware if you are using Ubuntu, any of those tools, right? You are expected that the tool, and when you use them, or your users, they have high-end devices, and you are building, that is the kind of persona that you have in your mind when you are building for them. But the idea is that there are some set of individuals that are not able to have those high-end devices, or they don't have high-end networks to be able to consume those open source tools. So today we want to look at how we can bridge this gap between the framework that I have built and it is battle tested in the most demanding environment, which is Nigeria. All right, so we may be familiar with the idea called the Goldilocks infrastructure. There is an interesting story about a young girl who eating and testing different meals. And in these different meals, she came to the conclusion that one is too hot, one is too cold, and the one in the middle is pretty much not too hot, not too. So, ideal state that we all to get. Everything that we are building, we are expecting to have this ideal state in our system. If you are building for the airport industry, for the aeronautics industry, if you are building open source systems, if you are building operating systems, you are expected to have this Goldilocks state where things are just normal. But then what happens when you cannot estimate the changes in which things occur? That is what we refer to as this protocol engineering. And what it brings together is this. We are going to look at the docs, the tools, and the individuals, the mentors that allow us to be able to build tools in an environment that is not stable. So that is what we are going to describe. Just before I go on, myself. My name is Rufai Mustapha. I am a software engineer and technical instructor. I am based in Lagos, Nigeria, and I help products and people build tools and help them to maintain that stable relation between chaos and conformity users would love and users would love to use at all times. So let's get right into it. In the real world experience, what I am advocating for is building a tool and engineering tool is select that. There are things that will fail. There are expectations that will fail. For example, if you look at this image, there are some expectations for you being in. You know that if the person in front of you moves, you yourself, you need to move. If you don't move, you are going to cause chaos because gridlock between you and those people at the back of you. So this is not just about hacking around. It is a practical implementation that we see in the 2020 2050-10 international standard for software engineering, where we are specifically looking at fault tolerance and the ability for us to be able to recover. Now, I work in real life at several fintechs where we engineer something called partial success. The scenario for a fintech would be that you have a ledger that you want to update, but versions are failing. Now, in open source, when you have your documentation and you want your documentation to be accessible to people, but when somebody comes to that documentation, in the first 5 minutes, they are confused. They are not able to use your API. They are not able to understand the demos. They are not able to understand the endpoints that you have. You have your README, right? And your README implies that it is supposed to be a happy part, a normal part, right? But the reality says that people, when exposed to that README, they are not able to use it. It is confusing them, causing a barrier, a block on their path to using your product. Allow people, or we are expecting that people have a direct way in which to use our product. But the reality says otherwise, in that these API not necessarily always work, right? It fails in the IEEE 1028 standard for technical reviews. So the goal and the idea is that we want to move away from these anti-fragile documents, documentation that doesn't necessarily describe but anticipate and mitigate the environmental failures that we are seeing. So what real life experiences do I have that I can share with you? For example, a few years I have been involved in typical mentoring and creating documentation for individuals. In my work with RiseVest, with a constraint called this. Generally, there is an alliance for affordable internet report that is in emerging markets that you can download online. Now, what this report says is that a research area pioneered by the Inc., right, allows us to be able to see that people are struggling to be able to use documentation that the community don't necessarily conform to, such that if you have support and people are complaining, raising issues, but that dichotomy between the issues being raised and the documentation being written, then there is that difference, and that this is new barrier for entrance for people who want to use that product at any point in time. So, for example, if you are building demos that run offline via Docker, or you are mocking it on your local server, now we aren't just helping individuals in that sense. People, you are using that documentation, and people are able to understand what you are building. But at the end of the day, there is a barrier, and that barrier we want to breach. So when we try to remove and breach, when we try to remove this barrier, what now happens is that there you can see people that are going to be coming into that product and using it. So the next part of this is that how do we scale the idea of building this barrier and allowing people to continuously use your product, your open source product. So growth in open source product isn't just about the code that you are writing. It is also about the community, particularly, and how the dynamics of that social interaction and the people that you have. So to scale our program, for example, at a school in Berlin, there is something I refer to as cognitive apprenticeship. So this is not just around the typical volunteering that we are familiar with. Um, what we call it, or what I call it, is knowledge that we can share in the immediate moment with, and it is not just about sharing it with you, with individuals in your own community, but making sure that it is evergreen for other people in the community to be able to use. So what this does is that if there is a pattern or a mentorship program that brings new entrants for people to learn the product, and then as they gradually become good at that product, then they can turn from just learning the product to being the mentors in that product. So there are several ways of this. For example, recently Claude, it is not a open source product, but you will notice that they released a academy similar to many other open source tools. Now the goal of this academy is that they can bring in new entrants, they can standardize the knowledge that people have, and then they can release that, they can create care around it, which means that people can, they say, I am familiar with this product, there's a standard documentation around this product, and people are learning, yes, this product constantly from us. Same thing the Linux Foundation does. If you remember, there is a diversity report that they released, and what this does is that they were able to tell us that there is a contribution gap between those who are using the product and those who are actively developing the product. So what we want to do to scale the product that you have is you want to in a standard way for people, you can call them students of that product. What that would do is that when they are students, they learn that product. Their focus is on learning that product. And then if it is in a standard, if you have a standard separate academy for it, what that will mean is that they would learn the product. And as they progress in that their learning part, they now become mentors to those who are coming behind them. So their diversity would now increase. Some go into documentation, some go into active development, some will go into community management. And in all these parts, they are not just themselves being users of the product, they are also come back to that product, such that it now becomes a cyclic cycle of those being introduced to the product and getting them to become experts in that product, and them being mentors back to that product. So this here is what I refer to as our approach to being able to understand the idea of open source tools and how we can use mentorship and docs and documentation with the demos to constantly grow your open source product. So you will see this in real life in many different places. For example, if you look at similar products, for example, there is Linux, and you look at the entire system of Linux, open source Linux Foundation itself. There are free tools actively being given to people, students, users of the product, that allow them to come into that system, allow them to, without pressure, learn that product carefully. And as they are learning the product, there are other mentors that are and or that are available to throw them into the deep end of the sea, to throw them into making it easy for them to enter into that ecosystem. Another part that we need to consider very important is is making individuals being comfortable as they use your product. This here is where we refer to the community. So a very important role here, as you are allowing people into the system, is to have a rule-based approach, such that any person coming into the system understand the code of conduct for that community. So it is such that it is easier and comfortable for anybody coming into that system to be able to operate. In this case, if there are outliers in that system who don't conform or don't want to abide by that rule or the code of conduct that we have in that, it is best in that moment to remove them from the community. That way, you can foster the growth and the product that happens in that system, right? All right. So at the end of the day, the goal of this presentation is to explain to us why the open source product that you are building are not growing. And what I have described to you are three system ways in which you can use something called the protocol engineering system to grow your open source tools. How can you do this? The first way is to ensure that you have the documentation, you have the docs, you have the community, and building this, you build a system of cyclic mentoring and cyclic student mentors approach that allows everybody to be able to use the system to grow their community. What this would do is that it creates an everlasting strategy for you as the open source owner, as the open source maintainer, to constantly have users of your product, not just users, to also constantly have people who would improve your product for you, people who care about your product and how this product is going to impact the community you want to use. So, as you create more product and you want it to be much more robust, you should, as you think about this happy part, this ideal part, this Goldilocks part, too hot and not too cold, you also want to consider the part that is expected, the reality part, where there is chaos in the industry, where there is chaos in real life, and you want to ensure that you are standing somewhere in the middle, that irrespective of what happens on the extreme ends of these cases, your product, your open source tool continuously grows. In the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 3 years, your open source product will still be alive, will still be growing, because you are constantly injecting new people into the system. And these new people are constantly being mentored, being guided by those who are coming, who are already in the system, who are already conversant with the system. And how do you maintain this hegemony? You maintain it by having a code of conduct, a guide for your community that you constantly check and you constantly review against those in your community. And anytime there is any system that breaks your code of conduct, you try to manage and make it come back into that system. It is not a perfect, it is not always going to be perfect, but what it ensures is that there is longevity, there is growth, and there is harmony for anybody that constantly wants to be in your system. So the next time you're trying to build an open source tool, or the next time, or if you are currently building an open source tool, try to consider this. Try to have that system that allows you to be able to constantly manage those who are coming into the system and those who are going out of the system. Thank you very much for joining this session. Once again, my name is Rufai Mustapha. I have just explained to you the idea around docs, demos, and mentors, and how to grow your open source tools across the world from my own experience, helping tools and fintech products grow across Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustapha. Do we have questions from the room? Please speak close to the microphone.
So, hello. Thanks for this nice talk. if I understand you correctly, your basic idea is to involve the user community in, let's say, growing itself. What incentives are there for the users to become involved and to mentor others? Do you have a system in place, like, I don't know, reputation badges, whatever?
Yes, very good question. So, your question is what incentives are there for those who want to become mentors, right? So, typically, as you grow in this, every layer badges should have points attached to them, should have credibility attached to them. So, what this means is that if you're a student, you would the next stage, and that gives you much more credibility over the people behind you. For those that are mentors, it means that now they can be able to be maintainers of that product. They can join the governing bodies of that product. They also get societal credibility to be able to run for positions. I am a leader in this role or in this community, and for that reason, I can be able to do things, right? So, for each level and for each layer, there are badges involved, and each of the badges. So, in other scenarios, if you were AWS or some other places, they will say certificate, right? And you'll be able to qualify for those certificates to be able to get to that next level. So, yes, generally, the idea is that for each level that you scale, you have badges that describes you as that particular thing and gives you that credibility to be able, gives you the credibility and the credence to do things from that stage. Yes.
Thank you. Do we have more
You're
questions?
welcome.
Let me check if there are any questions online. Thank you again for the talk, and see you next year.
Yeah.